alternative experience.
The alternative experience.
The alternative experience.
Hey everybody, Nicky Joe, Eddie Vane here. Welcome to another episode of Alternative Experience. Thanks for tuning in. So this week I have a really interesting guest, a gentleman by the name of Mischas. Now, Mischa actually reached out to me, but he's quite big in the world of podcasting. So first of all, that was quite a big sort of compliment for me. But secondly, really, really useful. So what Mischa does is he actually works in the world of podcasting. He actually helps people to establish their own podcast or social media channels, and he does a lot of strategy, lots of information with regards to how you can get there without costly advertising, obviously the nuts and bolts as well, the setup required, microphones, etc. Really interesting sort of information that he provides in this podcast, but even more so, really interesting guy. Very, very warm sort of conversation I felt it was. Stayed with me for the week. But yeah, I hope it's the start of maybe a series of these podcasts. So he has quite a large following, and a little bit of his background is he was a seasoned old school sales expert. But he sort of kind of semi-retired at one point, became a yoga instructor, changed his pace of life, put his kids through school. And now he's the founder of the Influence Army and the host of the Table Rush talk show. And as I say, really does sort of focus on helping heart-centered entrepreneurs to amplify their message and build an influence without that costly advertising, which normally is part of the deal. So are you ready to go on an influence tour? Really hope you enjoy the show, guys. Thank you. Zvigintsov.
Yep.
Okay.
Said beautifully, by the way. Well done.
Awesome. Well, but to be honest, I've got a surname Eddie Vane. I've gone through life. Some of the attempts that have been made at it have been quite funny. It's been it's definitely built my resilience over the years. That's for certain.
Oh my gosh! Right.
So, just to refresh my memory, because I wasn't taking notes because of that being on the back foot the other day. You said Nebraska, Montana, San Diego. Is that right?
Jackson, Wyoming. So Wyoming, Montana.
Wyoming. Okay.
Yeah. And then technically, go ahead.
I know it was two. I know it was three places that I've always wanted to go to. I knew it was that. So Wyoming.
Yeah. And actually, there was San Francisco Bay Area.
Oh.
So it technically went Jackson, Montana, San Francisco Bay Area, San Diego.
Amazing.
So, yeah, been so spoiled. I'm like, I just honestly like 4 of the most beautiful places in the world if you like those environments, right?
Yeah. Well, you make your own luck at the end of the day. I think it's been your journey that's taken you through those amazing places. So take credit for it.
Yeah. Thank you. Cheers. I will indeed. Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
I mean, that must have been some sort of upbringing, Wyoming.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I was born in the States, have the Russian name, obviously, but my father, grew up, was Philadelphia socialite family, bred to be a lawyer, was a lawyer, went to, what's the school he went to? North Carolina, Tar Heels, whatever, if you're famous, whatever.
Big uni.
But what's that?
A big uni.
Yeah, absolutely. And so my father was very much, he was a yogi. He was conflicted from the start. So yogi, but then getting this corporate pressure from the parents, this success thing, right? And so he in his 30s started rejecting the corporate lifestyle. It was like this, being a corporate lawyer is going to kill me. And so he quit, ended up in Jackson, Wyoming. He sent his resume out across the country. This is in the 70s, like 1970 or something like that. Wow. And the Jackson Hole ski area was had effectively just started up, a few years old. And they're like, hey, we need a CTO, CFO, a chief financial officer.
Yeah.
So my father was very much the mountain man, fisherman, mountain climber. All this was like, I'm there. So moved the family in 1972 to Jackson, Wyoming. I was 3. And so then that's how I grew up in Wyoming, just with a mountain man father
Luck of the draw
hippie
with that one
yoga
then.
guy. Yeah, look at the draw for sure. Yeah, to give you a long answer to that.
No,
But
the answer, there's not a long answer and there's not a wrong answer either, is what I always say. And I'll do my best. I've got one of these, I'm one of these personalities where sometimes I'll interject and I'm trying to do better. So what I will be doing is I'll be letting you talk, don't you worry. So don't worry about over elaborating. That's where we get the
okay.
gold. So yeah, I suppose at heart, were you sort of kind of country bumpkin as from at heart, like out in nature, all that kind of stuff? Is that where obviously it's expanded into the surfing and stuff now, where your surroundings have changed, I suppose?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and my mother was sort of a gypsy hippie. So my mother was German, actually came over from Germany in mid 60s, met my father in North Carolina, Chapel Hill. That's where it is. Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Yeah. And actually my father was engaged to be married. It was a proper wedding, was introduced to the proper family, the proper girl. The invitations had been set out. Social status was going to continue. And my mother came over from Germany, just this beautiful German, hippie-ish, swept him off his feet. He bailed on the other marriage and married her. And so I grew up in Wyoming with, what do you call them? The hippie hair, we called it, like not Brussels sprouts, but bean sprouts and bread and, and fresh juice, things like that, And and just very healthy. My mother and father both very active, outdoorsy. So I just grew up with that. And then I suppose heading to the coast was that natural rejection of the family, but maintaining the outdoor lifestyle.
Connection to nature.
Yeah, exactly.
I think
love surf.
It's a very, very powerful thing. If you were someone that grew up in a city, then obviously you don't know that connection, so you wouldn't have picked it up. I was born on a very small island called Hayling Island. Only 70,000 people that live there. So again, surrounded by beach, always. Do you know what I mean? Even just driving across the bridge, getting home at night, you're going across the sea, and we kind of take it for granted because it's just your daily life. But whenever I sort of went away from it, so back in '97 when I came to Portugal with my friends, I remember I was here for 9 months, but on the way back, just going across that bridge, just that feeling. And I think when you've grown up surrounded by it, whether it be playing in the woods, ponds, frog spawn, all these things that you sort of get to encounter, I think that basically it's in your blood in some way. So, and I think that because I did move to, I suppose you call it the big city, but it's a place called Portsmouth. It's another island, but it was our big city, and that was a concrete jungle. And it's the amount of life it drains out of you that you don't really realise on a sort of a physical, maybe spiritual level. It does drain energy out of you. It does take the life out. And I think I've moved to the hills now, and coming back to this fresh air, this beautiful scenery, really has felt like coming home.
I think too, when you're embedded in that city life, and I did it. I lived San Francisco, loved it. It was so much fun. But you are surrounded by that concrete all the time. You don't have your bare feet on the ground.
No.
It's constantly, there's concrete, asphalt layer between you and the earth.
There's a really interesting research study that was done. I'm trying to remember which school did it. But basically what they found is the concrete sharp edges, obviously there is going to be an element of the grounding and the physical element as well. But actually the actual element of concrete sharp edges activates the fight or flight nervous system. Just by going and being by water, like flowing water, can just completely turn that around. I mean, our physicality evolved, under the sun, sleeping on the ground, touching the earth, grounding, all this kind of stuff. And that's a lot of what I do in my coaching program. But very interesting. I think it's we've lost touch with nature a little bit, I think, as a population.
Yeah, I would agree absolutely. In our Western culture, although I think it glamorizes the outdoors a little bit, or this the glamping or whatever. Yeah. I would say as the Western culture, we haven't hit bottom on that yet. Yeah. I think we're still idolizing the shiny object so much.
Mhm.
I would say I definitely, just hearing you talk, I take it for granted how I do 4 walks a week at least that are a good hour to 2, where
Perfect.
I'm along the Pacific Ocean, on the beach, or walking the coast, and it's just a part of my routine. And I forget that what a gift that is.
Yeah, yeah. That was
You
the
know?
thing we were kind of really sort of up against here, because we knew we wanted to move away from the crowds, I suppose, to a point. But we knew that was moving away from the sea, and that's been a little bit of a problem. So even like little things like I'm putting on a men's group, but obviously what you want to be doing is meeting something like I said, down the beach, sunrise, grounding, cold dip, bit of breath work, that sort of thing. But that's a 35-minute journey for me, so it's kind of like, yeah, it's difficult to get the best of both worlds. But maybe one day we'll find a sort of a seafront area which isn't quite as built up.
Yeah, you could get a van and pack everybody in there and do some sort of the drive could be an exercise,
That's a good
right?
idea.
You could.
It's a good idea, and the West Coast here is pretty amazing from by all accounts, from what I can tell. Lots of surfing here, lots of surfing. They've got the big wave here. Is it Navarro or something they call it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
Oh, how close is that? Yeah, that's insane.
it's not too far.
If
It's not too far. It's West Coast. But we've got a WhatsApp group that I joined as soon as I got here, because they were expecting it to go the first year I was here. So it's been put on this WhatsApp group, and every now and then you get updates, like people taking pictures or saying, "Oh, it should be going this year." So I'm hoping it will soon. It hasn't since I've been here, from what I'm aware of.
yeah.
Different level.
There's different level. Yes, I've surfed some big waves, but nothing remotely. Nothing. I would not say I was a big wave surfer, but I've been on some double overhead where you're looking, going, "Oh my God, this is nuts!"
Brilliant.
I've
only done it a few times. I used to bodyboard back in the UK, because we don't really kind of have the waves for it. My friend had a stag do a few years back, actually here in Portugal, and we surfed, and it was my first time, and I was told I was a natural. However, I think my last 2 waves, it was definitely the last wave, it taught me to respect it. That's all I'll say to you. That was one where I was like, oh, okay, I've bitten off a little bit more than I can chew here.
Yeah. I have literally gotten between 50 and 100 stitches because of surfing.
Wow.
On my face twice, on my head, like the top of my head a couple of times, leg, from fins flying around. Yeah. It's and then just the ragdoll, you call it getting ragdolled.
That was what I had.
In the wave, just getting tossed, held down.
I had a rather bad one of those where every time I thought I was coming back up, I was probably further away than I could have imagined. It went on for a lot longer than I was expecting.
My gosh.
I said a few prayers.
Yeah. And really, too, I think the other thing about surfing is the illusion that it's the big waves that will do you in, but it can be tiny and still be incredibly humbling.
They're just powerful, aren't they? It's just, like you say, it's a different type of power when you're sort of looking at the ocean, that's for certain.
Yeah.
But obviously, for the people that are now going to be listening to this, if you'd just like to introduce yourself and a little bit, obviously we've gone into a little bit of your background, which I'm sure we'll come back to soon, but exactly what it is that you do, a little bit about your journey and how you got there.
Yeah, cool, fantastic. And by the way, I was not aware that we had officially started. I kind of was aware, but I was like, well, but anyway, no big deal. So welcome everybody.
I do it quite naturally, shall we say?
You snuck it in there. Yeah. So Mischa is my name, obviously, and you said my last name beautifully. Zvigentsov is the technical pronunciation.
Awesome.
But what I do is I help people go on what I like to call an influence tour. And basically it starts by going on a podcast tour. So, we have messages we want to get out there. I like to say my audience is heart-centered entrepreneurs, people that are really moving from the heart, whether they're aware of it or not, but maybe perhaps money is not the main motivator. It's more of they're in touch with a passion or a purpose or a destiny, or if you believe in any of that, call it what you will. I personally do a lot of meditation, prayer, mantra into how can I serve. So when I get disconnected or discombobulated, or what should I be doing with my life, or what should I be doing today, I try and come back to how can I be of service. So I'm very in touch with that, and so I'm looking to serve those types of people as well.
Perfect.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect. And I mean, obviously, this is something I looked at your podcast, listened to a number of them. They're actually very, very well put together. I like it. Got a lot of sort of things from it as well about the style, about a lot of things that maybe I'm focusing way too much on, that with regards to maybe editing myself out a bit. And I think there's obviously, like that thing that people say, we hate the sound of our own voice. And I think that when you're in a podcast, you can take that a little bit too far and be a bit too critical. So yeah, listening to the style that you put on, it's very, very nicely polished, but also not overly polished to the point where, I mean, as an example, I sometimes struggle for a word, and rather than sort of keep that bit in there, I'll edit it out so I don't look stupid. But whereas actually it's more natural to keep it in there. And yeah, no, I like the style of it. And obviously you're up to 600 odd episodes. I mean, how often do you go live, or how often do you record?
Yeah, great question. When I started my podcast, which I started 5 years too late. So anybody listening and or watching, if you are being called to start a podcast or a YouTube channel, or to put yourself out there on the social media platforms, or start a blog, or start writing, I would say start now. Like, this is your cue. Get after it. Because it definitely, I was inspired to start a podcast 5 years before I officially went live. I had bought mics. I had started interviewing people. I had started creating content, but I never went live with it until 5 years later, which is interesting. I don't begrudge it, but I'm just encouraging people, like, get started. Right? Yeah. And so what happened was, I was in this space of raising my two boys. I had been divorced. I'm still divorced. So I'm divorced. Gotten divorced. How am I trying to say it? Anyway, divorce, career upheaval, all this stuff.
Big change.
Yeah, big change. And I'd become a stay-at-home dad, retired from my career, my sales career as a mortgage loan officer. And what I was doing was teaching yoga and focusing all my time on getting my boys through high school. And teaching yoga was amazing for that, because it's very flexible. Like, teaching yoga is very flexible, and I don't know, in my area, I'm not sure about yours, if there's a strong yoga community. Yeah. But you could sub classes. So people have a set schedules, and they're constantly looking for people to fill in as a yoga teacher. It's like a substitute teacher. Okay. So you could work as much as you wanted without having official classes. So, and this is a very long answer to your question. So I appreciate the structure of your podcast, because it allows me to to go on.
Definitely. What can you find out in 5 minutes? Nothing at all.
Yeah. Yeah, right?
Long form.
Oh my gosh. So anything that would interfere with me giving 100% time to my boys while they were in their teen years became very painful to do. Or how am I trying to say this? Like, the universe was like, you get to raise your boys, get them through high school, make them their breakfast, take them to soccer, take them to swimming lessons. My boys were into swimming. All these types of things. I'll say this, and then I'll answer your darn question. My boy, Waylon, who's my most sensitive one, it was so clear that my job was to hold space for my boys and be available for them. when my son Waylon was a teenager, he would literally open the door to his room and look out and see that I was in the living room, and be like, "Okay, Dad's here. It's
Wow.
all good." Right? And so the commitment to podcasting, I think that's one of the reasons I did not go full into podcasting really until my son graduated high school.
Mhm.
So, but I started in Russell Brunson's, if you've heard of Russell Brunson.
Yeah.
Love Russell Brunson. He's got great ideas and frameworks and methods and things like that. But I immediately, when it became clear that I had time to jump back into the entrepreneurial world, to put some time and energy and space there, I of course went full on and joined a $25,000 coaching group. Right? I couldn't just like I couldn't just
build.
Yeah. I was like, believe the hype, go all in. It's
Yeah.
effectively what I did.
Yeah.
And it's very funny because I had a conversation with Waylon. Actually, I said, "Hey, look, Waylon, I've been raising you and Cooper and committed all this time to you too, and all this stuff. I'm thinking about joining this coaching group and going all in on building something in the entrepreneurial space, but I need your sign off because it's going to take a lot of my time, and I won't have as much time for you as I usually do." And he was a senior, so he was in his last year in high school.
Mhm.
And he said, he's like, "Dad, I got a girlfriend, I got a job, school's on autopilot, like, go for it." Right? So one of Russell Brunson's things was start a platform, or get started on a platform. And he still says this, and he says, publish every day for a year. So he says, pick a YouTube channel, or create a YouTube channel, create a blog, or create a podcast,
Mhm.
and then publish every day for a year, and it'll change your life. You'll never worry about money again. It's something like that, right? And I was like, well, actually, he does say, and you'll never worry about money again. And I was like, I never want to worry about money again. I'm all in, man. So to answer your question, I started publishing every day. So I started my podcast. It took about 2 weeks for me to get over the fear, or what would I talk about, or this and that. And so basically, a couple weeks in, I started publishing every day, and I would interview somebody once a week. So for a year or two, I published every day.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do 2 episodes a day, just getting used to the mic, getting used to talking on camera.
Comfortable. So it's almost like it's not there anymore. It's kind of just like a fighter practicing a specific move. Is that muscle memory? It becomes a bit more easy for it to become natural, and again, then also easier to become productive because you've not got all of those procrastination-based sort of barriers that you put in the way.
Yes, absolutely. And you can drop me anywhere. I could jump on an interview at any time in front of a camera, literally.
Mhm.
I could be in another state doing something. Somebody could come up and go, "I want to interview you." And I'd say, "Great." And it's easy for me to drop in, pay attention, not be super insecure,
Mhm.
Things like that. I was just thinking of a framework that I have of let me tell you what it is here. Give me 1 second.
It's funny, actually. I've
Because-
actually got a question on here. Do you have a framework? That's quite funny. You've ticked that question off for me.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Where is it? You'd think I'd be prepared for this.
No worries.
This is where you might edit it out, or anybody watching, hang in there. Check your DMs or something, or hit pause.
That's it.
I don't know. Basically, I don't know what the name of the framework is, but I've got it. If you join my thing, it's in there, and it's all
We'll give
you
links.
need.
We'll give links in the podcast notes as well. So all of this kind of stuff will be covered. Don't you worry.
Yeah. So I was being interviewed for a podcast, and I'm like, just put yourself out there, go speak on podcasts, blah, 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 talking about all the stuff. And he goes, "Well, what about us introverts?" I was like, "Oh, that's a great question. I do a lot of this stuff naturally." right? Or it's what seems naturally to me that I do.
Yeah.
And so I really thought about it, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. I when I was in grade school myself, I was such a sensitive kid.
Mm.
And if you put me on the spot in front of the class or something like that, I would cry.
Yeah.
I was like super sensitive. And it was even to the point of, and this probably did not help, a teacher one time totally called me out. She says, yeah, we'll bring Misha up here to answer the question, but he'll probably start crying and getting all emotional. And
Not the
I
sort
was
of
like,
thing you need.
oh no. Yeah. And sure enough, I go up there to answer the question, and I melt down. I start crying and all this. And it's probably one of the things that drove me to like be comfortable on camera.
Also,
But
probably one of the things that sort of probably psychologically played into that 5 year delay. You know, it's kind
yeah,
of, I mean, a lot of what I do obviously is when I spoke to you the other day about sort of childhood traumas and not necessarily them being massive events, you know, that abuse, the thing that we always think about when it comes to trauma. And one of those big traumas that often comes up for me is public speaking as a kid and being laughed at or failing or something along those lines. And it does have a really, really sort of long-term bearing. So to do that and actually to pull that plaster off and to move on, that's a massive indirect sort of bit of psychology for you. You know, it's been a very, very sort of valuable lesson, I would say.
yeah, absolutely. I will also speak to, you said getting used to the sound of your voice. I hated the sound of my voice when I was in sales. I had a long sales career, and they would recommend that you record your sales conversations and then listen to them. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I could not do it. I was like, oh my God, my voice. Um, but the podcasting changed all that. And I'll tell you this too. When I started podcasting, I made a commitment from the start to whatever I recorded, I was going to publish, and I wasn't going to over edit it. Like you said, I'm glad that you spoke to that, because that is one thing that I try to do, is not overproduce it, not cut out the ums and all that. It's natural. And I think too, when people meet you in real life, unless you have the habit of not saying ums or like or this and that, they're not getting the real you. So, and then it just gets too shiny. I almost think it's nice not having it be so shiny.
Yeah,
but
it's something I've just been sort of, I suppose, up against, because I'm kind of, again, because you come from that point of view of, especially initially being quite negative and derogatory towards the sound of your own voice, and obviously already wanting to over edit it. It's yeah, you kind of, I mean, sometimes I'm sitting there thinking, oh, I need to take that out, and then you have to take a whole section out, and you think, oh, we miss a little bit of gold for it, but then really it is just having a word with yourself and realizing it is that over sort of what's the word? It is the over negative sort of mindset that you have. It's not rose tinted glasses when you're looking at yours. And I think what you've got to try and tend to do, again, just give yourself a little bit more space, a little bit more leeway, and actually realize that people aren't sitting there on your every word. I mean, I know people like to criticize, but it's not like that's what they're doing when they're listening to your podcast. They want to hear a conversation. So, and a conversation does take two people.
Absolutely. It's so powerful as well. What I love about podcasting and the amount of episodes that I have done and that I do, I'm my favorite a follower. I love listening to my episodes, and I go through phases where on my walks, I'll listen to an episode, and you start to pick up the bad habits. Mm-hmm. And so you can start to talk better, or have less filler words, or be comfortable with the filler words that you are using.
Yeah.
Or there's something to be said for the dramatic pause, for sure. It's almost like, let's have a dramatic pause in there to heighten the situation.
Contemplate as well. I mean, when you're having a conversation, you don't sort of like talk. The whole point is you don't talk over each other. You're not ready with your words. I mean, and that's also a bad habit to have in podcasting anyway, which I've obviously found in my time. But yeah, I've had to start writing things down like stop, take your time, listen, don't rush, these sort of things, just little pointers, and it does help you. Because otherwise what happens, again, if you haven't got that immediate word that you're thinking of, then it just creates more confusion in your head, and then you forget the conversation you were having, and the whole thing falls down. So at the end of the day, like I say, these are conversations, and I think that's why we've obviously gravitated to whoever it is that we listen to, that obviously brought us into the interest of podcasts in the first place. When it becomes over polished, it just loses its soul, and I think people are just going to switch off. They don't want it overly polished.
Absolutely. And there's an audience for everybody as well, which you spoke to. So I'm looking for the people that appreciate that pause, the fumbling, the rawness, perhaps. Yeah, I have only not published one episode, and I can't remember why I hadn't published it, but I did make that commitment that if I recorded it, I was publishing it.
Yeah.
And not over edit it, just get it out there. And I think Gary Vaynerchuk was the person who said it. He's like, hey, it's like some people, he's like, just put it out there, create it, put it out there, create it, put it out there. You never know what is going to resonate with people. And what he really said that resonated with me was that some people are going to think that your failures are art in effect. That's my own wording of it.
Yeah.
And I love that thought.
Yeah.
Right. There's people out there that resonate and appreciate and love what we do. And oftentimes my judgment skews that. I'm totally off.
Well, art is subjective, isn't it? And that's a way of looking at it. It's down to the perspective of the person viewing it. I think what we also do, and I think we kind of mentioned this very briefly in our first catch up, is I think that the way that our brains or our minds tend to work, we tend to look at sort of the 7.5 billion, and how can I literally put the net out so wide that I get as many of those as possible, and then you kind of water down what you're doing, and there's no real clarity. So I think what we really need to be doing is realizing it could only be 10,000, it could be 5,000. It's the 5,000 niche that really sort of resonate, that they hear a message, they're comfortable, they're going to be listening to more than one episode, they're more than likely to start commenting, so you can actually start making the tweaks that obviously that they would sort of recommend, and that's how you grow. I'm at the stage at the moment, and I've been there for a while, and that's why it started to regain traction. I put the podcast to one side. In 2020, I got a lot of problems because I was doing medicinal cannabis, and I was getting censored. I had Facebook pages taken down, all this kind of stuff. And then I moved here, and it was kind of got all this equipment. I loved doing it, but I self-censored myself out of it. I was in the car a few months back, and there had been an episode that I'd obviously played, and it had gone into my iTunes, unedited. So literally, it was the first time I'd listened to it, and it just popped up on my iTunes, and my kids were in the car, and it came on, and actually, I wasn't disgusted by my voice, and actually, I was like, "This is really bloody good." And my mindset completely different to when obviously I recorded it, when I was looking at every reason not to publish it, and I just thought, you know what? I've got lots and lots of stuff that I can get up. I've got loads of pre-recorded articles that I could redo. I've got some people that I've already had as guests that said they'll come back on. Get over that imposter syndrome. And like you say, get that muscle memory in place just by just doing it. But when you were doing it daily, what were you doing? Were you doing were there structures to it? Was it just thought exercises? Were you just going live and talking to people? How did you initially start that for the amount of content, as an example?
Yeah, great question. I needed to learn how to riff for myself and be willing to let a thought stream start rolling and speak to that thought stream and see where it went and go from there. I guess is how to say it. And literally just hitting pause, play, and record on an idea. So eventually, what happened really quick was, and I still do it today, and I have lists of just ideas. So I don't have my phone next to me, but on my iPhone, on the Notes app,
Yeah.
you'll see like I just am constantly opening the Notes app and writing down a little bit of a thought stream. And we just got the thumbs up from Apple. Thank you, Apple.
Brilliant.
Anybody listening to this, I put a thumbs up, and Apple graciously let everybody know.
Amazing.
Anyway,
I love it.
But I'll put hashtag idea or hashtag podcast, so I can search the hashtags in the Notes app for ideas. And so that's really just what I started doing. And I didn't limit myself to what I would talk about. And then here's another thing I got from Russell Brunson. If you look at this little doodle that I gave from him, it's basically episode ideas, right? And so, you've got episode style, educational style, epiphany style. And so you can talk about ideas, inspirational. He's got all these different little things. So I would just go off of that. Oh, an idea. Oh, inspirational. Oh, what did I learn? And I've sorry about that. I'm a deep thinker. Yeah, I'm a deep thinker. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
yeah, no, you did. I think because I've been speaking to my wife about going to 2 episodes per week. Number one, because obviously 1 episode a week in a year's time, you're still languishing under 100 episodes. So there's an element of obviously having the productivity out there, but I don't want to really sort of I don't want to take the quality out of it. And obviously, a lot of the stuff that I've been doing is educational in form. But I do have a lot of thought exercises. I was saying to you the other week, I don't know how to sort of, I call them thought exercises. They're kind of philosophical thought exercises. And I find that they flow a lot better because obviously thought exercises are just the jambled sort of thoughts in your head, and that's how they are. But then my want to get everything perfect would be me sitting there writing it out and having a script. And I don't really like reading scripts. I like to get familiar enough with it so that I can actually obviously converse it as naturally as possible. So
so here's things that I did, and I've done episodes on this, and a proper podcast would have those episodes on the top of their head, so I could say refer to this episode. But I do speak to this. But basically, I walk a lot, so I find the times that I'm doing something consistently where there's an opportunity to record. And I walk all the time, like I said. So I have a cool little mic. Again, I should have it with me. It's called the Shure MV88, plugs in. And so on these walks, I am ready to record. So I would encourage anybody listening or you, what is the thing that you do where you could find a time to record? So maybe it's when you're doing the dishes. Maybe when you're cleaning the house. Maybe it's when you're driving. Maybe you've got a half-hour drive every day. Maybe it's, I don't know, you watch TV, turn down the TV and record then. So you can still have the activity of the TV going, but just record something, right? So for me, and especially during the pandemic, when I was walking 7 days a week because everything was shut down, there was plenty of opportunities to record.
Yeah.
So I record for an hour, I walk typically for an hour and a half. And so I committed to having my episodes be between 10 and 15 minutes. So, man, if you get a good stream of conscious going, you just record. I could literally record 5 episodes on a walk.
Perfect. Yeah.
Right. And then you get in the habit of starting and stopping. And so people won't even know it's the same day.
Yeah.
Right. And so what do content creators do that make Instagrams that where there's lots of video? They might take a day and record 2 weeks of content. They've got different clothes. They move their hair from the left to the right. They change their shirt. They change where they're recording in the house, the locale, right? They've got all this different stuff. And so podcasting gives lots of opportunity to record audio.
Mm-hmm.
I did need to as well let go of having to have video associated with it. I have tons of video content because half my episodes were me riffing at the desk or things like that. When I say at the desk, sitting at the desk in front of my mic, idea comes up, beeline to the desk, turn on Zoom, record.
Yeah.
And once we get that muscle memory going and we find the window, it's easy to go, oh, yeah, let's get on. Let's something happening, right? Let's hit record. So do those tips help?
I would say, yeah, definitely. I think for what you're saying there is something that I use as a larger lesson. And I use this as a larger lesson for my coaching clients and also my own life, because I am I am coaching client number one. That's where it all started, and that is remove as much resistance as possible. I think the best way to remove that resistance is literally just to build that muscle memory, is to get to the point where you get the uncomfortable parts out of the way, so that when that idea comes, which it does at the moment, the first thing is that muscle memory of hit and record on the podcast, rather than actually, I'll do that tomorrow, or I'm faffing around with other stuff, sort of really prioritizing it. And
absolutely. And if you think about it, if you look at TikTok or Instagram or YouTube Shorts, any of those things that have gained, oftentimes channels that have gained traction are really obscure. It's the grandma doing dishes and she's talking and the camera's there, right?
I saw this
or
one
it's
day. I saw one like this the other day. She's got like 150,000 views per video, and it's literally just that.
Absolutely. So if you're thinking, so I'm automatically thinking, if you're somebody who's tasked with cleaning the house, or you like to clean the house, or you find cleaning the house meditative, because there's all sorts of things. There's people out there that have maids, or I don't know if we're allowed to say maids anymore, whatever. They have somebody who cleans the damn house for them. So maybe you're not cleaning the house, but what do you do where you can record? And so me personally, I love the exercise of doing the dishes. I just think it's so meditative, and it's such an exercise of giving.
Yeah.
I just think it's such a powerful tool. I had back in the day, I had a mentor. I was 19 or 20 years old, and I was trying to get my career off the ground. And I was really frustrated that I was working at a restaurant and they had me back there doing the dishes, and I wasn't the manager. Right? That was my modus operandi, or my thought process in my youth was, how come I'm not the CEO
already?
Already, exactly. And looking back at it, it was like, yeah, you're not ready to manage the restaurant because you don't know how it works.
Exactly.
It's like, oh, right? Or you don't know how the business works.
We don't think of practicality. We don't think of practicality at that age.
Yeah, not at all. And so I had this mentor, and I was bummed about having to do the dishes, or I think for a while I was having to like strip cilantro, and it was a pizza place, so there was an ungodly amount of cilantro that we used, and I still am sensitive to cilantro to this day. I'm like, ugh, because I plucked so much of it, right? But he basically said to me, he literally said to me, do the dishes for God, like pretend God's watching. And I was like, oh, like if I was doing the dishes for God or my higher power or the universe, whatever you want to say, like what attention to detail would I put into that? What pride would I put into that? How I would be humble in my approach and grateful. Right? If God's like, do my dishes, I'd be like, hell yeah. Right?
Also, what energy are you putting into that? And again, if you want to, I mean, we are beings of energy, and there seems to be a growing sort of body of research, which seems like there's one thing that sprung to mind as soon as you said that. They did some sort of research into food. So like things like fast food that's prepared by sort of a college student with no love, no care, no attention. The actual food itself could be argued is probably toxic in itself anyway. But then the difference to going to someone that has lovingly prepared a meal, that's obviously put a lot into it, and actually then sitting in that atmosphere, there is an energy transfer, whether it be just the ambience of the situation that you're physically picking up on, or whether it is something a bit more spiritual. The work that you put in definitely has a big difference in the energy that you receive.
Absolutely. So anybody who loves doing the dishes, and I'm just going to use that as an example, or maybe is forced to do the dishes because maybe their dream is someday I'm going to have the revenue and cash flow where I have a housekeeper and I don't need to do the dishes. And I've got somebody who's cooking. I have a chef that's cooking amazing organic meals for me and doing the dishes. God bless. I love that. Love that idea. I would take that. But let's say you're not in that space yet. And so you could call, if you're into mindfulness, you could say, Nikki's mindfulness podcast while I'm doing the dishes, or come up with a really cool name about that.
Yeah.
And then literally record your riffs while you're doing the dishes and have that be your hook.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. I'm definitely still in the point where I'm putting barriers up with regards to wanting to be at this desk, wanting to be no kids in the house, all that kind of stuff. And I think that is interesting. I mean, I do have some sort of like portable microphones as well. I've got the Rode ones. I went down the Rode route. So that is something that I probably will sort of focus a little bit more on. Again, just having them with me, just in case a thought exercise pops into the mind, and not putting any pressure on that it's got to be half an hour, sort of an hour's long. It doesn't have to be full of winnets. It could just be like a little a resonation to bring them to the next piece of content I'm putting up.
Absolutely. And speed to market. It's another thing I love about Gary Vaynerchuk. He's speed to market, or content to market, content to platform. And there's a spot for overproduced content or well-produced content. Who's the guy? Dan Carlin. If you hardcore history.
Yeah.
I mean, that content is mind-blowing. Yeah. I'll go through phases where I'll listen to his content, and it's so well done and captivating. So there's a space for all of it. I definitely believe there's a speed to market, which I like too. So I'm always thinking speed to market with the content. Find, like, you could use your iPad or iPod earphones, your earbuds or whatever the heck we call them these days. Like, those record fine. Yeah. And if the waters of the sink is in the background, I mean, that's endearing almost. I'll tell you another thing that I learned about this whole thing, and what served me very well are two thoughts. And one is, if you only have 50 people listening to your podcast that are engaged, active, is it 10 people? Like, how powerful is that? If I had a stage to talk to people of 10 people, captive audience all the time, like, wow.
Yeah.
And so think of it that way with the podcast, right? So I think we can get stuck in this numbers thing and trying to be Joe Rogan or any of these podcasts that do well. Or I'll tell you what drives me crazy is a pet peeve is I tried listening. I'll look through what are the super popular podcasts or the ones that are driving big numbers, and I'll listen to them. And so the true crime ones, I'll listen to them. I'm like, these are horrible.
Yeah.
Right. And like the people, to me, they're horrible, but they're inspiring because I'll be like, this guy is literally rambling and mumbling and giving bad opinions about stuff and has a bazillion listeners. So I'm like, all right.
It resonates somehow, doesn't it? So he's playing to his audience, basically.
Yeah. And then I listened to just the other day, the other month, and it really was disappointing and inspiring at the same time, which is along this line, was Conan O'Brien's podcast.
Right, yeah.
So I look at Conan O'Brien's podcast, and he's got, 30,000 likes or whatever it is, which is a lot. When your podcast has 30,000 likes, you've got some traction.
Definitely.
And, tons of comments. So I'm always looking, when I'm looking at podcasts, I'm looking at how many on Apple, how many, 5-star reviews, or, there's Apple again. How many reviews, how many, likes, and then also how many written reviews. And the bulk of the podcasts out there maybe have 5 to 10 likes, like literally 5 to 10 likes, and a random written review.
Yeah.
So my podcast, the Table Rush Talk Show, has 82 likes. So I'm like, dang, that's good.
Yeah.
Right. And then it has, I'm pretty good about getting a written review or two a month.
Mm-hmm.
So for you, I would encourage you or anybody listening who has a podcast or wants a podcast. And I have a framework for this and a method for getting reviews. It's so easy and so good. But tactically thinking about getting likes and written reviews, and how can we do that? And I've got a process that's super fun. I'll save it for another day. But anyway, my point is, when you see someone like Conan O'Brien's who's got 40,000 likes,
Yeah.
oh my God, right? I'm building a lot of drama here. But I listened to the damn podcast, and I was like, him and his team rambling on at the beginning, it wasn't resonating with me.
No.
And then his interview style didn't resonate with me.
Well, he's relying upon the coattails of his position, which obviously a lot of podcasts do, and that can work or it can't. I mean, you look at things like one that springs to mind is the Royals, Harry and Meghan. I mean, obviously everybody loves the Royals. Everybody loves this couple, even though they've been through like a very tumultuous time. They get a podcast, and number one, I don't think they actually recorded many, but they just didn't get any sort of traction whatsoever. And like you say, that I've noticed that with a lot of your Conan O'Briens, your John Peterson, your John Stewart's, these sort of characters. I don't think they do really. They don't transfer over to podcasts very well, especially not the audio side. Maybe they've got these habits where obviously there's a lot of interaction in studios and there's a lot of visual stuff, a lot of visual acting, if that makes sense. And obviously, with podcasts,
Conan with his head bob, you
don't really want acts on podcasts. People want, like you say, real people. They want to sort of resonate with a story. They don't want to be, they don't want to be sort of acted to, if that makes sense. It's a bit of a different ball game.
Yeah, and the other thing that speaks to is that the money behind Conan O'Brien. He writes. I imagine that his show was highly promoted with money behind it. When I say promoted, meaning, people who are listening to podcasts they're paying for ads. Say, listen to the Conan O'Brien podcast.
Yeah.
Or I imagine that, Conan leveraged all the stuff out there to get mass followership quick, and he's such a powerful brand name. And if you do like Conan, you're obviously going to gravitate towards it. So but it was inspiring to me because I was like, I mean, on one hand, it was like, man, he's got a lot of followers, likes, looks, all this kind of stuff. But on the other hand, it just reminded me that there's room for all of us, and he's putting out shitty products. My language, I would just say it. I just was like, this is
and
like,
I don't think
I can do it.
There's not much of an excuse for it when they've obviously got such resources as well. There's not much of an excuse for it, I don't think. But I noticed over the last couple of years, because obviously a lot of podcast style shows have popped up, because it is obviously the boom market. I mean, even if you think about people in news, like I mean, I don't really follow either news in America, but like your Tucker Carlsons or your Cuomo's and stuff, and they're putting these things out. And again, like you say, I don't think they've really got the gist of the podcast audience, because I think they all, even their sets feel different when they have video podcasts. I don't know. I don't know if it's just this. They've been a bit of a cookie cutter in their chosen industry for so long that they have ways of doing things, or if it's just they have a different vision. It doesn't really, for me, I mean, again, with podcasts, it's going to get to a point where it will be the new news, and it'll be something for everybody, so it will resonate. But as far as I see that industry at the moment, the podcast industry, it's got a very different feel to what mainstream news or mainstream celebrity even sort of stands for, I think. And I think it's been very apparent for me for the shows that I've been seeing.
Yes. and so I work hard to detach from the metrics. Number one, like I try and let go of the ego metrics. Can I let go of this? And it's hard sometimes,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
So fortunately, I do have a certain passion for the what do we call it? Not the platform, but the modality or
Yeah.
whatever for podcasting. I love it. Um, and I want to make sure to touch on the other point, which was how can I serve? And I'll get to that in a second. I'll just talk to it now. I had this other riff I wanted to go on. Maybe it'll come back. But so, the other thing is, how can I serve? I'm constantly thinking, how can I serve? How can I serve? How can I serve? When I'm going to record an episode, when I going to jump on with you today, I'm literally like, God, how can I be of service here? What can I bring to the table? Right. And I try to get into that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever I'm recording an episode or going to start riffing or doing things like that, I'm thinking, all right, God, how can I be of service? And when I say God, I'm going to say, I'm talking again, whatever your belief is. I'm not a big Christian guy at all. So when I say God, it's like universe, higher power, source,
yeah.
whatever the universal thought. I don't know. There's something going on out there. It's not me.
Yeah.
So there you go. But I'm just going to say God for lack of a better word, right?
It's descriptive enough for me. That's no problem.
Yeah. So I went through. I've been involved in the recovery community for decades. I was a horrible alcoholic and addict in my teen years, and by the grace of God, judge rank. When I was 17 years, 9 months old, last day of high school, was like, look, Mish, you can go to treatment for, this was back in Jackson. He goes, you can go to treatment or you can go to jail for 6 months. Choice is yours. And for whatever reason, I was inspired for recovery. And I've had straight line recovery since. And this is not to impose that on anybody, but it's just to give
context and backdrop.
Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah, some context. So a lot of what I do is from comes to me, I've been taught, I've learned is from, a 12-step modality, a recovery modality, and a lot of 12-step getting off of drugs and alcohol or overeating or sex anonymous or gambling anonymous. Any of these anonymouses is like, all right, I got to deflate the ego, right? Which is what we see that all over the place. So that's not just common to recovery. It's like all over the place. You have spoken to that already about what you do and what you teach your people. And it's about ego reduction, right? 100%. Like getting a bigger, broader perspective. And anyway, I could go on and on about that. But the other part is service. A lot of recovery is deflate the ego. What's one way you can do that is to be of service, try and connect with something greater than yourself, but service, right? Like what a great way to build self-esteem. And so I'm constantly thinking of how can I be of service? And so interestingly, I had, for a good chunk of my life, I was on the upward success trajectory, super successful at sales, super successful growing a family, beautiful wife, lovely kids, house close to the beach, building my bank account, all these metrics, right? And in recovery, but serving in recovery. So, I'm mentoring people who are trying to get clean and sober. And so I'm in give mode a lot at that time, and knew what to say, when to say it. It was really easy to be of service because everything was going right. And I attracted people who were like, "Oh, I want what you've got," right? Which was this success and things like that, and which I'm grateful for, and I'm not poo-pooing any of. Point is, all of a sudden, divorce, career upheaval, family starts die, parents died in rapid succession. That this was 10, 15 years ago by now. Kids not acting like I wanted necessarily, like massive existential crisis. Money in the bank. Money is not the answer. I've got uh, I've got a compulsive need for validation.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is that I'm active in the recovery community, speaking a lot, speaking on stage a lot, leading meetings, doing things like that. And I went from a point of knowing exactly what to say it, knowing exactly what to say and when to say it, to total like, I don't even know how life works anymore.
It's amazing how quickly things can change either way. And I think the message there is either way. I mean, it can go from absolute perfection to, excuse the phrase, a shit show in your eyes, but then also flip side, it can also go the other way, with the right actions, the right mindsets, and obviously the right support network around yourself, and determination.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm all of a sudden leaning on my community a lot, right? And it was horrifying time, but at the other side of the coin, it was so beautiful and empowering because the community, both my outside of recovery community and the recovery community, rose up for me in such a powerful way. And I don't mean to overgrandize it or something, but people were there for me, right? And loving me and holding me and listening to me tell the same story again and again. As I was like, I don't know if you've ever been in that space, but horrible breakups, you can be telling the same damn story again and again, and to find someone who will listen to that again and again and again
I
can
think
be a gift, right?
I've not been in that position, but I've definitely. I mean, I think coming back to what I was saying to you earlier, I think it's traumatic experiences, anything that's kind of a shock to the system. I mean, my version of that would have been similar to yourself with regards to being in sort of sales and a corporate industry for many years, running my own business and getting myself that on paper the perfect life, because I had a nice car, I had a good job with a nice sort of income, lovely house, nice wife, all that kind of stuff. And it really stuck with me because at that point I'd probably have been about 8 years into my sort of mad scramble in my head of what else can I do? What else can I do? Because this is killing me. That work sort of thing, that materialism, that status had become so toxic for me. It was just that was my trauma. And I think when I was growing up, I was thinking about it the other day. It's very strange that as a kid this was something that was obvious to me, but it was obvious to everyone because it was part of the. I mean, it was even in movies. I mean, as a kid, I remember movies where men had nervous breakdowns or they, midlife crisis. It was kind of one of these things that I was so aware of it that it was kind of not an expectation, but in the back of my head, it was like, is this something that we'll lead to when we come to our sort of middle of our life? And I think that everybody goes through it. I think what it is you get to a point where, and 40 is a good marker because it's kind of midlife. It's kind of like, okay, 50% of it's out the way. We're now on the downhill part of this journey. I think there's a psychological thing that happens to you, and you either get your ear pierced, have an affair, and buy a sports car. You have a complete nervous breakdown and start using drugs and going clubbing, or you sort of pivot. And I had an existential crisis with regards to the fact that I'm so stubborn that I wasn't going to do anything about the job thing. So my body in the end went, tough, I'm going to do it for you. And at that point made the decision to lead the job. Didn't know what I was going to do. But then obviously my recovery and my reticence to go down the pharmaceutical, that antidepressant route with your doctor, and wanting to really sort of try and find a way I could get my head right, deal with the small health things that had crept in because of my continued stressed sort of outward. It basically became my job. It's become my job, and it's been a very lucky sort of turn for me. But I think one thing that's been a bit of an eye opener for me is it's really, it wasn't necessarily the job that I had. I think it was the lack of tools and understanding I had on how I could deal with those things and how I could, you know what I mean, sort of mitigate. Work is stress. You know, you're always going to have stress with regards to whether it's the actual job itself, whether it be it's not paying enough or whatever. There's always going to be something related to it. But it's having ways to really put that into perspective, and not having it as your main focus. Again, not focusing on all the things that might happen, the things we don't have, thinking about all the negative stuff rather than trying to sort of always put the focus on the positive stuff. And one thing that really comes out in a lot of the stuff that I've done personal development wise is actually that opening that to other people, opening that to outside, you know, not just being inward looking. Obviously you've got to get to a certain place, but that really does sort of expand when you open that out to other people. And this also, I want to say that as well, it's a very nice way of thinking, to actually have that as a driver in your life. I think it's something that I give you a lot of kudos for, to be quite honest. Have that outlook of how can you serve others, because I think we've all got lost in our own sort of problems, whereas how can I serve me? How can I get to where I want to be, you know? And it's, I think obviously there are other ways of going about that.
Yeah. And yes. And so to continue with that line of thinking, I went from, so I would get asked to lead a meeting in the recovery space. You call it lead a meeting or tell your story or whatever, right? They oftentimes have speakers at these recovery meetings. And I went from knowing what to say, when to say it, like I said, to being like, what am I even talking about, right? And two of the main lessons were, one, even though I was in a state of constant questioning, of not knowing what I was saying, when I was saying it anymore, like I was baffled. And people were still coming to me saying, hey, mentor me, help me, right? So I was like, oh my gosh, even in this state of unknowing, I can still serve.
Amazing.
So stay authentic.
Mm-hmm.
Stay authentic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it came to me, and I started speaking from stage about this, was that it was be like, all right, God, how can I be of service? And sometimes God's like, you know what? You get to be a total freaking train wreck on stage, and people get to see it, and they get to know that that's okay.
Yeah.
And that you don't have your act together, and that's okay. And that's how you get to be of service.
Mm-hmm.
People get to see that journey. And so I would start my talks by going, hey, you know, I prayed, like, how can I be of service to you guys today? And get ready, because I don't know, it's either going to be super inspiring and you're going to get these amazing nuggets, or it's going to be a total meltdown. So
Brilliant.
Get ready.
Brilliant.
Right?
I love it.
And so that's carried forward into the podcasting space, right? So I'm like, as long as I'm clean in my thinking, clean in my intention, clean with my motives, I'm here to serve, then it's like hit play and go and let it rip, and trust in the universe that what's being put out there needs to be put out there. Mm. That's where I was trying to go with that.
That makes
just
sense.
To say,
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So it served me so well to be like, hey, I oftentimes I don't know, right? Like I was in the worst upheaval of my life. People were still coming to me saying, help me get clean, help me get sober, even though I thought I was not a good representation of it at the time. Does that make sense?
I get you. We say this quite often in my kind of industry. It comes up quite often in coaching, like whether it be yoga, whether it be the sort of thing that I'm doing, breath work and nervous system, is all you've got to stop trying to portray this Instagram perfection like most people seem to want to, and actually just want to get across to people that you are just on the same journey as them, but you're a few steps ahead. And you've been through it, and that's where the connection is going to come from. It's like where you've been through it, you've experienced it, so that's where the resonation comes from. And actually being open and honest and not trying to paint this Instagram lifestyle is probably going to resonate more with them, that actually you're the trustworthy person to get them to those next 2 or 3 levels where you currently are, which they obviously are looking to get to. So it doesn't have to be perfection. You don't have to think you're the finished article. I think, you don't have to think that you're the expert that can never learn anything else. I mean, every day's a school day. I know as much as I can about my chosen field, but I'll never know everything, and I'm always looking for more.
Yeah, love that. Me too. I love that. Yeah, that's such a great thought. Uh, excuse me. I also wanted to make sure we close the loop on what if I'm an introvert, or what if how do I start putting myself out there confidently,
Mhm.
right? And so I was in sales for 20 years and listening to Zig Ziglar. These are more of the older school sales types of guys,
I
Zig
remember.
Ziglar, Brian Tracy, right? All these guys. And they are constantly, the messages that I heard and what was taught to me as I was selling and telemarketing. I made a million, literally a million telemarketing phone calls.
Mm.
It started by hand dialing, and then it was auto dialers.
Yeah.
and, and it was always smile, smile, smile. Like, smile when you're on the phone.
Mhm.
Smile when you're on the phone. And so I try and remember that in the podcasting. And when I was in my telemarketing days and in my sales days, through my whole career, I would print out in the biggest font possible, smile, right? So I had smile everywhere. So naturally, when I start a conversation, and you told this to me the first time we had talked, you're like, hey, man, you have great energy. And
Yeah.
it's habit now, right? I smile. I'm like, all right, smile naturally, like show up and smile with a good attitude. And that translates over the phone.
Yeah.
I believe it translates over text on energy. If you're smiling and putting good energy when you're text,
Mhm.
it comes across that way.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you would agree to that
No, I
or not.
do.
But
I think 100%. Yes, smile. I used to get that same. I was in the same sort of era of sales as yourself. Yeah, it was smile when you're calling, because people can hear you smile on the phone, and
yeah,
it is a genuine thing. It's the energy you're putting out. It's the demeanor that you have, even down to things like, again, posture. Trying to
posture.
put yourself in the right posture. I mean, you can hear the sort of meekness of someone that's over and hunched, and you want to project a little bit. And again, a lot of these things come with regards to your own. I don't like to use the word confidence, but I think it's more about your own self-image. How
Yeah.
confident you are in projecting that, and these are all things that are very relevant to this kind of conversation. I've always said that I'm an introvert at heart, but kind of going into the work that I did, I was working with my older brother. Basically, we set up a recruitment business, and I wanted to be my older brother, even though from very early on he was like, look, you can do anything you put your mind to, but you're not me. You'll do this, and in 10 years you'll be exhausted from it, but you won't give up, because you're very, you know what I mean, you're a good worker, you've got a lot of pride, all this kind of stuff. He
Yes.
basically read my tea leaves.
Covered.
But yeah, so I got into this and did that high power. You're only as good as your last week, and it just slowly drains the life out of me. And but again, just carried on, and that's the sort of thing I try and get across to people, is it doesn't have to always necessarily be the job or anything like that. It's try and listen to the type of person you are, be honest and open about it, because you can project whatever you want other people to see, but the person that's going to suffer is yourself. So identify your core values, identify the type of personality you are, and really learn that personality and play into its strengths, and try and live your life in service to it. Every decision that you make needs to be in line with those core values that gets you going. If you're working 10, 12 hours a day in a job, which you don't even agree with the principle of the place, it's completely at odds with your energy, and it's only going to go one way. Yeah, be confident, but again, don't use it as another piece of resistance. Actually think, well, there are introverts out there. There's a massive amount of introverts out there. There are people that I need to speak to that are actually going to resonate with my voice. But pre-record your stuff. You don't have to go live. I mean, that was another thing in my head. When I first did my podcast, I was like, I had this thing about going live on video, and I was like, actually, you pre-record it. You can edit it if you need to. And if it is toilet, put it to one side, Stop putting unnecessary pressure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, the great thing about podcasting too is we're all worried about our audience at the beginning, and we have no audience to offend or to that's gonna be upset with our bad work,
Exactly.
right? So yeah, I'll speak again to the I made a commitment to put it out there if I recorded it, and so I have stuck to that and lived with that, and it's been amazing. So then I'm stop judging it, and I stop thinking, is this good? Is this bad? It's like, hey, I'm in the right frame of mind of trying to be of service. So universe had me record it, so just put it out there, put it out there, put it out there. Yeah, so smile, roll your shoulders back. Again, I say a little prayer. I'm like, hey, God, how can I be of service? What would you have me bring to the table here? And then another thing is, have you heard of McCall Jones?
No.
McCall Jones is awesome. Everybody listening or watching should check her out. She was like a Disney. She worked at Disneyland and was one of the, Disneyland stars at the park or whatever, right? So she's the one that's out there on stage, right, doing all this, and super gifted at it, and just this massive extrovert. But she teaches, like, hey, what you do to be most authentic and bring good energy, shoot for that 7. She calls it the 7 level or 7 state, versus trying to be a 10, which is not authentic to us, versus like a 2, 3, 4, or 5, which is
don't be lazy.
When we're in, what's that?
Don't be lazy, basically.
Don't be lazy. Yeah, absolutely. And when we're recording like we are now, if you're at a 2, it's going to sound like we're at a 1 because we're not in person. Or if we're at a 5, it's going to seem like we're at a 3 or a 2, right? So you kind of got to level up a little bit to bring the energy so it'll translate. And so she says, have inventory some 7 life moments. So right. What are some 7 moments of your life? So for me, a 10 moment is like the baby's born, right? And you're like, so I don't necessarily want to bring that because that's over the top and hectic and chaotic, right? But what about the 7 moment? What about the first times when I did my first summit, a virtual summit? It was called the Tools for a Good Life Summit. It's a whole nother story, but I did the Tools for a Good Life Summit, and I reached out to this guy, Anthony Trucks, who in the online space is sort of well known, and he has this what he calls the shift method. But anyway, I reached out to Anthony Trucks, like, hey man, would you speak on my summit? And he responded and said yes. And he was like one of the first people I reached out to. And I was like, oh my God, this is real. Like, this is happening. Like, big people will say yes. Yeah. Right. And so I could tell you in detail about how I sent the email or this or that. And so if I can run that story for 30 seconds before I get on stage, before I get on a podcast, before I do that, right, that can bring you into a good state of energy if you don't naturally come to it. Like, I'm habitually bring good energy. I don't mean to say it that way, but
no, I understand exactly what you mean. And it's your default now, where you've got yourself to this, again, coming back to that muscle memory we were talking about earlier, means that you're not coming with too many butterflies in your tummy, so that you're stammering over your words, and your performance level is not going to be, the performance level is going to be there. And also you do have a naturally warm way about yourself, so you are very sort of much, it like I said the other day, that you can have some conversations which are great conversations and you get a lot from it, but that's what it was, and it's going to be informative. You get other conversations where you come away feeling a little bit warm, it's like warmed your soul a little bit, whereas I don't know if it's down to connection, that could be 100% what it could be, but I think it's also down to the energy being put out, and again, being confident, being happy in your own skin, having that muscle memory, so you're not having to worry about all the pointless bits that sort of maybe take a lot of the resources for a newbie, is going to put you in a much better place. But again, I think it's the work you're putting in, it's the warmth that you naturally have, and it's the confidence you have in your ability, which shows. Yeah,
thank you for that. I appreciate that. And the other thing is, lastly, is there's no need to be anybody that we're not. And I think that's what happens with people who tend to be introverted. Yeah. And they're like, well, I have a message. I do want to put it out there, but I'm introverted, and perhaps horrifyingly so. And so they're like, I need to become this other person to be able to put my message out there. And it's like, no, actually, you can be your complete introvert self. You can show up on the podcast with your sunglasses on and your hoodie over your face, and say your little mantras, roll your shoulders back and maybe you go from a complete frown to a kind of a smile, and your audience is going to resonate with you
Different
by
energy.
you being who you are. What's that?
It's that, and this again, it's the energy you're putting out. I mean, if you're censoring yourself, even if you're censoring yourself, that is an introverted character. If you're censoring that, it's again, it's not going to resonate. But if you're putting that energy out and you're unapologetically yourself and realize that, yeah, you're not going after that 7.5 billion. You're going after that niche audience that resonates with what you're saying. I think that's. I think thinking about it during this conversation, I thought about it many a time as well. Is it all of the censorship and all of the limitations come from our side? It doesn't come from the listenership. There's a listenership out there that's gonna either resonate and go to your work, or they're not. And then if they do, they're not going to be sitting there saying all the things that we're overanalyzing in our head. They're just listening and they're going with a conversation. And that brings in the natural side of it. Tripping over our words like everyone does, or not trying to, not being as flowing and as perfect as possible. Coming back to what we were saying about Conan O'Brien, people like that, obviously they've got this experience with keeping monologues perfect. Again, that doesn't resonate with this type of platform. So that only really sort of validates what we're saying even more, really. This polished side of things doesn't, well, it will sit here. There'll be an audience for it, but that's not really what the podcast game's all about, really. Or your niche audience won't be. Yeah.
And one thing I love, people, I don't pay attention to my metrics too much, honestly, at all, other than how many likes and how many written comments do I have. Because one cool thing about podcasting is the true metrics are behind closed doors. They're behind a wall, and it's even hard for, it's like, what's true, what's false? Like the numbers are ambiguous at best, even if you pay to know your numbers, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that's one of the awesome things about podcasting is that perception is big with podcasting. So I'm going to go down this rabbit hole. Perhaps I shouldn't, but I think that's what's so powerful about strategically getting likes, strategically getting written comments that are authentic.
Yeah.
Right. But making an effort to get that authentic feedback can really help in our podcasting endeavors.
So right? Validation to an extent, is it? Because people do like that validation from third parties. It's something that we do, especially in this internet age with everything.
Absolutely. And so if you look at somebody who's got a YouTube channel or Facebook or Instagram, all the metrics are customer facing. You see how many people watched a video, how many likes do you have, those sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
Like it's all there. There's nothing behind the paywall.
Yeah.
Either you have 1 million views or you don't.
Exactly.
Right. On a podcast, you can't tell how many listens somebody has unless you're actively promoting that, hey, I've got 1 million downloads. And then it's hard to validate anyway. Again, I don't mean to go down this path, but I think it's an interesting thing about podcasting is that we can play up the that perception, which is everything.
Yeah. Is
right?
that because a lot of people don't download and because it doesn't register, just listens? Is that the reason why, or is it? And also
Correct.
multiple platforms with RSS feeds and mine's all over the place. Ooh.
Yeah. Whoa.
We got
Apple's doing something.
We got thunder.
What's that?
No, we've got a thunderstorm.
Oh, yeah. So that's a fun thing about podcasting is that can be played up. We can leverage that perception. So I love podcasting for that. I love podcasting. So myself, when I go look at shows, I'm like, how many thumbs up do they have? And when was the last written review they have?
Right.
Right. If you haven't gotten a written review for 2 years and you've been publishing consistently, I'm like, not one person is taking the time to even say you suck or you're amazing. Like, do you have a listenership at all? Right. And so subconsciously, I think people who are looking at podcasts to follow, to like, to listen to, either they're consciously looking at those metrics or they're subconsciously flopping through them, right? So they're like, oh yeah, Conan's got 50,000 likes. It's got to be good. Mischas only got 90. why am I going to listen to Misha? You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I know the
Um,
definitely thought process. It goes across the board with this day and age. I think reviews, third party recommendations. It's just a bit of validation that people kind of seem to like to look for.
Yeah, and it's easy with a podcast. I have this great framework for it, and I don't have the name of it in front of me again. It doesn't matter, but how to rapidly get in a fun way tons of 5 stars, tons of authentic written reviews, right? And again, because I'm not trying to build an unauthentic picture, I'm always like, hey, give me a review. Well, I'm like, just tell the truth.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to, please just tell the truth is all I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Right. Good, bad, and different. But this is the other thing about podcasting that I do want to say. And this is why I was going on about this whole metrics and downloads and all this stuff and all the shiny object metrics that can impede me from moving forward. I think podcasting is so good because we as podcastees, we get to practice telling our stories.
Yeah.
And if you're in a space of wanting to tell stories or stories are important in what you do, podcasting is so great to start telling your story on a mic, on a camera, or whatever, and get good at it and listen to it. And so one of the most powerful things for me is one of the things I teach is the story bank. It's called my story bank framework. My story bank, get your stories together framework. And basically what you do is you come up with the story arcs of your life. So basically I have my recovery years, my my success, grow the family years, that story arc. I've got my flame out, death, failed relationships story arc, and then I've got my rebirth story arc, right? And so I've got those 4 story arcs, and then I'm like, okay, what are the stories within those? I've got my personal stories, I've got my mentor stories, or my impactful people stories, I like to call them. And then I've got my customer stories, right? So within those story arcs, like I'm trying to inventory, again, my stories. Yep. My mentor stories, right? And so and that could be the impactful people stories. That could be a literal mentor. Back when I was first in recovery, the 2 most important people in my life were John B., who was like, here's how you implement a 12-step framework in your life. And we literally, once a week we met, and I've got so many stories around that. But then there was Steve B. Steve just, I was in an orphan state, and he opened his doors to me and taught me so much about life as a young man, right? But then there's also like the guy as we're walking down the street and the homeless guy says something to us,
a lesson,
and we're like, lesson, right?
It stays with you forever. It's so impactful.
What's that?
It's so impactful that it stays with you forever, even though that's a fleeting moment. It doesn't
Exactly.
have to be a permanent
I just
fixture.
got the chills, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a permanent fixture in your life. It could literally be just those lessons that have stayed with you through whatever experience or person that you met.
Exactly. And then your customer stories. So I think so many of us as salespeople, as coaches, as people who are trying to put ourselves out there, we do a really poor job. I've literally interviewed thousands of people. I've been paid to travel across, the United States, the world, to interview entrepreneurs. And so many of us are bad at telling our customer stories. So can we start inventory our customer stories and get in the habit of telling our customer stories, right? So, I've got Rick, who implemented the story bank framework, what I'm telling you right now.
Yeah.
And Rick now, not only does it help him with his podcasting endeavors when he goes to speak on podcasts, but he was like, this changed my networking life. He's like, I'm involved in all these networking groups, and now, oh my gosh, I'm intuitively know what stories, when to tell them, right? Yeah. And so Rick, who joined my program, I'm just giving you an example, and I'm shamelessly promoting what I do at the same time.
But go for it.
But you get it, right? um, Carissa, who's in my group. So Carissa started inventorying her stories. I have another framework which is called it's the call out your audience headline and some other frameworks in there. But basically, she started doing some audience work
Mhm.
and some messaging around some the audience with these frameworks that I have. Next thing you know, she's speaking on a virtual stage, and and somebody who's listening reaches out to her and says, "Oh my God, you know who your audience is. Your messaging is so good. Here's gave her a $30,000 package,
Wow.
right? So, uh, and like we want to be able to start telling those stories,
Hmm.
right? And be willing to tell those stories. And I'll go on with our customer stories around that. Is that a lot of times people go, well, I don't have permission. Go get permission,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Or and along the lines, ask for forgiveness,
Yeah.
right? And then I would say this: a lot of people think that their customers don't want them to tell their stories. But who's one of your current favorite mentors or somebody that you've paid for coaching or something like that?
I would say one of my mentors. Ooh, I've got so many in different industry. One that I've paid for is a guy called Rockwood. He taught me I did my breath work classes with him, and the reason I have a lot of respect for him is the direction he took into explaining breath work and the nervous system and the analytical side, which is really sort of means that my business has gone to where it is. So yeah, probably Lucas Rockwood, I would say.
Love it. And then before and after, was your before with him? It was kind of messy. Maybe you weren't having the success you wanted, or maybe it was even a mental state. You were in a bad mental state before, and then after, he kind of transformed your mental
Yes,
state, or what was the big?
definitely the mental state, because obviously my it's funny because obviously because it's my business offering, but it's also my recovery. They kind of the two stories overlap each other. So
Yeah,
obviously in the earlier start, it was down to the difference it had in my frame of mind, my control of my nervous system, the difference it had with regards to where I could put my mind at any particular time. Again, when I wanted to do some work, clearing my mind and get myself to the point where I could do that. So there was the physical side, but also it just kind of made a lot of the stuff I've been doing click into place. And it purely just by accident because of the approach he took. I could have gone and done courses with a guy called Michael Bieker, who's also very well known in breath work, very good at what he does, but very much more spiritual in his way of delivering it, which I don't have a problem with, but it wouldn't have resonated with the way my mind works. So I think
yeah.
indirectly, yeah, just I just found the right teacher at the right time for it really to have that 10 times the impact that it probably would have if I'd have gone down a different route.
I love that. What a great answer. And it highlights one thing that I want to bring up, which is that so many of us, or what I will hear from people who maybe help people with sensitive before states.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, well, my customer isn't going to want to talk about what a mess their life was,
Mm.
right? Or that before state. And I'm like, well, if you're who, tell me the mentor that you like that you used again, your breathwork guy.
That was a guy called Lucas Rockwood.
So if Lucas came to you and said, hey, Nikki,
Yeah,
uh, give me a testimonial,
yeah,
would
definitely.
you do it?
Yeah, 100%.
Imagine you'd be honored.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the case for most of our clients, especially even people that are in the most messiest of service providers, or however you want to say that, right? Where they're like, yeah, your customers are willing to tell the gory details,
Mm-hmm.
and
Definitely.
they're willing to have you tell the gory details, and they also would be honored to have you share their success story,
It's funny you should
right?
say that because just by complete coincidence, my last client, because he knows it's quite hard for me to get. It's hard to get my message across because I'm struggling on specifically who it's targeted on and the specifics of how to get it out there because it is a very different sort of service. But he said before Christmas, he's like, I need to be on your podcast. He said, let's do a podcast. I'll tell them exactly what you did for me. We'll explain this in a podcast. And I was like, tick. So that one fell in my lap. It was kind of because we were talking about it. He was like, you need to get out to more people. He said, the change you've made in my life, he said, you need to get this to a broader audience. And I sort of told him the struggles, and he was like, let's do a video, let's do a Q&A. And I was like, come on my podcast. So he was like, yep, I'm going to do that. So he's my next guest.
I love it. And then, obviously now you could go to him and say, hey, I'm going to start telling your story, even though you haven't been on my podcast yet.
Yeah.
And get it. And he'll say, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So I think that anybody listening, like, you have people in your life, your customers, that they want you to tell their story, and they'd be honored if you told their story. So we got to get our mindset right around that. And then the other thing is, people go, well, I don't have, what if there was no customers at that time? Well, it's like in recovery, in my early days, I was inspiring people. I was serving people. It could have been family, friends, whatever. So customer stories, you don't have to lop it into like customer. It's like, who have I inspired? Who have I helped along my own travels?
Yeah.
Right. And that can be a literal paying customer, or or an associate, or the homeless guy, right? That you inspired somehow.
Again, where there's a will, there's a way. At the end of the day, if you really want to remove that resistance, there'll be somebody you can find out there that has, even if it's the person that inspired you to take that step, someone that said, oh, you're really good at that, by the way, you should, and actually put you on that journey. I mean, that it's thinking outside the box, and being creative with it, without obviously pulling the wool over people's eyes. But like you say, it's broadening that focus and removing the resistance. No one's going to say anything positive for me. I haven't had a client yet. Okay, well, why are you doing what you did? Was there someone that recommended it? Is there someone you can speak to? Again, even having a conversation with somebody about why did you recommend? What did you see in me that made you say that I should go down to this line of work? Or it's thinking outside the box and not being so pigeonholed in what we're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. And so telling our stories is so important. But I can't even remember why I went on the telling your story riff. So captivated with our conversation, I lost track.
That's a good
thing. But
it was
so we
the introvert. It went from introvert and then into the sort of telling the story, and that's ways of getting content out there. And actually, you were saying that a lot of us don't tell our stories, and that's one of the big problems. And I think that is right. I think it comes back to what we were saying earlier about the Instagram thing. We want to put across the perfect life, so therefore the little bits that probably are going to resonate more, we censor out of it, and it's actually flipping that on its head. People are going to resonate more with the things they're experiencing than they are that, oh wow, look where he is. I'm so jealous of where he is, that they can't resonate with that. They can wish for it, they can want to be there, but it's not going to captivate or hit the heartstrings because they've never experienced it or whatever.
Yeah, and that's yes. And so that reminds me, yes. So podcasting, what I love about it, it gives me a platform to start telling my story, telling stories. So you got to inventory your stories. That was my point, right? So start inventorying your stories. Anybody listening or watching this right now, like, start your own story bank and take those story arcs and start inventorying your stories. And then they'll start coming up at the right place at the right time. And, when I started doing that, Russell Brunson, again, was my initial inspiration for inventorying stories. Like, hey, if you want to sell one to many, you got to get your stories in line. So start inventorying. Inventorying them is basically what he said. And if you look at Russell Brunson, or people like Russell Brunson, they're all about the story. And the story is what adds the value to what we do as marketers or coaches or whatever, right? Like that's where the value add is. It's basically what he says, and you can see it.
It feeds into all of it, doesn't it? Because it also then allows you to, again, coming back to that 7.5 billion, you want to find your niche. It then allows you to create, especially in the sales and the marketing side of things. And again, that is what we're doing here. Even if what we're selling is a conversation and information, it's really just filtering down to that niche audience. Again, I think across the board, it's weird. These rules seem to sort of kind of, when you identify them, they kind of apply to almost everything. So the Russell Brunson side, obviously, it's about finding that niche client, creating that avatar so that the message you're delivering resonates with them. They've had this pain, they've had this fear, they've had this worry that they're trying to deal with, and that's why they're going to resonate with yourself. And I suppose you'd use the same thing when identifying listeners to a podcast, because it is the people that are going to not take the bait, because it's not about the bait. It's the people that are going to resonate with your message that are actually then going to come in and become regular listeners, and not just, like you said, those ego numbers that we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. And yeah, so podcasting, again, anybody thinking, should I start a podcast? Should I start a blog? Should I start a YouTube channel? Yes, start it now. Get used to telling your stories. It's a great way to practice telling your stories. And if you're more visual, obviously YouTube. If you like the audio platform the best, obviously podcasting. But podcasting does have video, so I love that aspect. You can take advantage of both. But if you're a writer and that's how you want to tell your stories, well, you got to start practicing writing your stories, right? So I'm just going to reiterate again, one of the most powerful things my podcast did for me and does for me, no matter the listenership, I get an idea for a story that I want to start telling. Mm-hmm. Well, what's the natural first place to start telling it? On the podcast. And then I can re-listen to it and go, well, does that resonate with me? Mm-hmm. Does it have the impact that I think it is going to? And I go, oh yeah, okay, or good. Or you can start to see how to expand it or shrink it or this or that, right? But for me, it's been a place to start telling the story and then work it into the rest of my conversations, my networking, my friends, family, customers, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
No, 100%, definitely. And again, coming back to I kind of lost my trail of thought what I was saying earlier, is the avatar thing is, again, you can have multiple stories that are very true to yourself. They're experiences you've had in that evolution of you becoming who you are today. And a different story is going to resonate with a different market. And the same with regards to the podcasting. So it's going to open up to a larger listenership. And if you then roll that out to your marketing strategy for your business, it's also a very, very similar thing that you can use to maximize your return.
Exactly. And Russell Brunson talks about how he was selling from stage. Russell is the master of one-to-many, webinars, selling from stage, stuff like that. One of the masters, but he's, in our current time, he's a master at it, right? Yeah. Love him or hate him, he is a master. Yeah. And one of the things he talks about is that he would sell from stage and he would tell man-centric wrestling stories. Most of his stories were man-centric, right? And so when he would get done selling from stage, mostly men would get up and go to the back of the table and buy his program, whatever it was at the time, right? And so he tells a story of how he went through this phase of trying to get pregnant with his wife and this and that, and they had all these problems. And he was on stage one time selling or telling his story, doing whatever, selling, and he spontaneously started talking about his wife and the frustrations they were having and this and that. Somehow that story and his story bank came up in his talk, and he got all emotional and all this. And then he got done and he said at the end, like, women and men got up 50-50, went back to sell, which speaks to exactly what you're to buy his program, which speaks exactly to what you're saying. And what you've said is that as we're trying to find that audience and build that audience, depending on the story we tell, we can attract a different person. Yeah. So Russell told that story. And so I have an opportunity to speak at meetings all the time, recovery meetings. I'm always out there in the recovery community, like I said. And I strategically started applying that because I was like, I can get instant feedback now. Russell's so busy and on stages all over the place with webinars. He can get instant feedback through his webinars. Yeah. My instant feedback loop is through, whatever, meetings. You get what I'm saying there. But I was like, I'd had this experience where I had a Toyota truck and I rolled the thing a couple of times in early sobriety, right, where I was snowboarding and driving all over the western United States and, driving way too fast on icy roads. And I was like, I'm going to start telling that story and see what kind of response I get, right? Yeah. Versus like more of a touchy-feely, blah, 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 right? And I told that story a couple of times. Sure enough, like a couple of like one guy literally reached out to me. He's like, "Man, I need your help." And I love that Toyota story. I used to have a truck and blah, 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 la, la, la.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, I was like, oh my gosh, it's so more powerful than we know how the stories we tell. Anyway,
I
thank you
think
for letting me
no,
riff
no.
on that.
I think that's, and again, it leads into something that I say a lot to people as well. It's like one of the big problems I find, I probably mentioned already when I'm coaching people, is this thing where we kind of project ourselves how we think people want us to show up. You know, that self
Mm,
censorship that we were saying earlier, which I think is seeded in our childhood when we're being told no, stop, don't. You know, it starts that self censorship behavior, and I think if it happens for long enough, we take the reins and continue doing it ourselves. Yeah, and I think that I
yeah.
think we can do the filtering and actually filter out half the crowd by doing it. So it's maybe the lesson I take from what you're saying there on the podcast side is if something's happened and it's a story, tell it, see how it resonates, tweak it, put it to one side if it doesn't work. You know, put things out there and judge it on its performance and its feedback rather than do that yourself, rather than being judge and executioner yourself. You know,
Yeah,
put it out, and
exactly.
let the audience tell you if it's good or bad.
Yeah. And this is a good reminder for me, and I'm so glad we're having this conversation, that the podcasting space, internet space, social media space, blogging space, all of it is super competitive,
Mhm.
and instant results are rare. Some people get lucky and start their podcast, and somehow an algorithm grabs it and it skyrockets them to fame. But the reality is that's not the case for most people. It's a learning process that you've got to one day at a time, one step at a time, one episode at a time, one, you learn, you pay your dues, you grow, this and that. So
It's a
keeping our
process.
expectations in line. What's that?
It's a process. I mean,
Yeah.
I've come across a lot of podcasts, and if I'm honest with you, I don't think I've ever started a podcast on episode one. I've always found podcasts and then been like, oh wow, there's 100, 200, 500 episodes of a back catalogue to listen to as well. And that's the other thing, is people might not find you on episode 120. They might find you on episode 500, but then discover all the stuff before. There's no, it just depends on, like you say, having that little bit of luck, having that episode that's on a subject that resonates, or that's, you know what I mean, it's there's got a lot of things that have got to go into it, but I think you've got to just have no expectations. And like you say, I think the main thing that I'm getting is productivity.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And I'll say this about the story bank, and we can stop talking about that. But don't judge what you put on the story bank. I literally just, if a story comes to your mind, and I'll usually put a word or a phrase or a sentence or two. It doesn't need to be the full
Hmm.
story.
Yeah.
It's like, what's the thing that jogs the memory?
Hmm.
And as I was doing my story bank, and I was at the same time committing to put myself out on more podcasts in a big way, to go guest speak on podcasts, which you asked me at the beginning. Did I say that? I help people do that. So
Yes.
I'm not sure if I said that or not.
Yeah.
um, uh, I remembered all of a sudden that time when the teacher called me out, that traumatic experience that obviously informed me so much and has stopped me realistically for 5 years getting that podcast
Definitely
going.
lasted with you.
But yeah, I wrote it down and I was like, whatever. And my subconscious started percolating on that story, obviously, because I was speaking on a podcast and the guy asked me, well, what about us introverts? It was an e-com seller. And he's like, well, most of us e-com sellers are introverts. What about us introverts? I was like, well, have I got a story for you?
Perfect.
Yeah. And anyway, so I would encourage anybody listening, just don't judge the story, or should I put it on here or shouldn't I? Just, if it comes to you, just write it on there and move on. Just start inventorying your stories as a regular habit and process.
Well, like you say as well, is you can self-censor it and say no one's ever going to resonate with that, but then you can be put into a position where you're in a conversation where all of a sudden that becomes very relevant. So actually having it for that recall is always going to be a useful sort of scenario. And again, you never know what kind of conversations you're going to get into. You can speak to very, very different people. And again, when you're sort of trying to do this self-judgment thing, which I think is really, really sort of a bad habit that we have, but this self-judgment thing, you're not taking into consideration the nuances in the individuals you may be speaking with, to, etc. Again, that's not just guests, that's also potential sort of audience members as well. This world is made up of some very, very varied people, is what I would say. So the chances of your story resonating with somebody is very, very high. But I think, again, take that focus off of the perfection, the 7.5 billion people, because even Joe Rogan doesn't achieve that. Even the biggest podcasters out there, they're like Marmite. I speak to as many people that dislike them as like them, and they're at the top of the game. So really sort of focus on the people that are going to give you feedback. They're going to give you the warm feeling by the fact that they're coming back. I see that on my Substack. I can see that there's a list, and you've got like 1 to 5 star on how often they listen. And it's really nice to see that although I don't have the largest following, most of them are 4-star plus, which is a really nice thing for me. So it's like, well, I'm not going to be losing anyone soon, so I haven't got to worry about my numbers going down for the time being, as long as I carry on doing what I'm doing. But yeah, up in the game. It's all about, there is an element of numbers game in anything out here, especially in these markets where there is 7.5 billion people trying to make the most of it, be that diamond in the rough.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of many of the loops that we started, we have perhaps closed. So do you have? I don't mean to.
No,
I could go.
As you can probably tell, I could talk for days and days. I like a conversation, but I do always like to leave there a little bit for later, because I would like this to maybe become something that we do again. Obviously, I'd also like to appear on your show if that invite's still open. I didn't book it yet. I thought we'd get this one out the way and see what we produced, and then sort of tee it up with regards to your availability after. But very, very keen to tee that up. I've enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed it again today. I don't know why. The start of the call, or start of the podcast, I was a little bit nervous, which I haven't been for a long time on one of these. Maybe it's because obviously, looking at your podcast, you've got a good followership. You're obviously very established. You're very polished at what you do. And not for a second I think you're going to judge me in any way, but for some reason I had a different mindset. But within 5, maybe 10 minutes of the start, it was gone. I was relaxed. I was back to the conversation we had the other day, which was very warm. And it stayed with me for the week as well. Like I said, I did an article a while back on a research study which says, and I think I've now noticed I got something wrong. And there's a research study out there that says that if you want to improve mental health, one of the best ways you can do it is to have a meaningful conversation every day. And in that study, it was pick up the phone to your mum, your brothers, your sisters, your loved ones, whoever it may be. But I think the feeling I got from our conversation the other week was actually it doesn't have to be pigeonholed into a loved one or something specific. It's a meaningful conversation. It's a conversation where there's a connection, where it gives you a nice warmth, because it stayed with me for the week. The reason it stayed with me for the week, because I didn't record it, and I was sitting there thinking, I really wish we recorded that, because I hope we can recreate it. But if we don't, I just want to be able to go back to that and sort of maybe use that as some pointers on how to be on the podcast, because it was very natural and it was very nice. But I think we've recreated it today. I certainly have, from my point anyway.
I would agree 100%. This has been a awesome conversation, and that warmth. And I would agree the conversation from before lasted. It resonated. Resonance. It definitely carried through the week, and so was very much looking forward to this. And I was nervous too at the beginning.
Brilliant! No, it's not
very
just me.
funny.
Well, I say to people, I say to my clients every day, I'm like, do something every day that gets the positive butterflies in the tummy going. And I think if you get to a point where that stops happening, then you're not growing. So I look at it as a positive. But it was strange. I think maybe the last few podcasts I've done, I'm either on my own or I've been speaking to people that I know and I've got a bit of a relationship with. So maybe just that sort of initial part wasn't there. But yeah, today I had some nerves. I was feeling it, and I was like, in the lead up to it, I was like, what's the matter with you? Come on, sort it out. But yeah, it was good nerve. Is there anything that before we finish up that you would like to promote? I'm happy for you to promote any links or any promotions or anything at all, or if you just want to put it in the notes, you can say that now, whichever's easiest for you.
Yeah, I would say if anybody listening is inspired and goes, hey, I want to get my message out there. I love the idea of an influence tour. I have a message that I want to bring to market, increase my impact, influence, income. And speaking on podcasts sounds fun, right? Go to badzuck.com. You can go to badzuck.com, and I have an offer there where people can jump into my program. And the other thing you can do is go to guestingguide.com. I have a free downloadable guestingguide.com. Just give me your email. You can download guestingguide.com, and it's basically shows you how to execute a profitable podcast tour.
Perfect. That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
And like I say, if you send those over to me, I'll take those down anyway. I'll put them in the show notes, obviously in the social media shares as well that I send out. Just so you know, this will go out next week. I do them on Tuesdays, so it'll go out next Tuesday. And like I say, it will definitely get me booked into yours. I'd like to do a follow-up. And also, again, if you're open to it, I'd like to do this again on this podcast because although we covered everything in the initial, feels like we could definitely talk about more things, whether it be professional, whether it be more sort of life-based and personal. I'm happy either way. But no, really, really appreciate your time. Loved that conversation.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Thank you so much. I'll throw a little hook out there or something that we can talk about, or what do you call it? Open a loop.
Yeah.
I'm so aware right now that people hear what they want to hear no matter what I say, or I'll hear what I want to hear from somebody, and oftentimes it's my own neuroses guiding what I think somebody is saying to me.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So I'll be like, that person doesn't like me, or they're being negative,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just the way I hear what they're saying, and
Perception.
they might not even have been saying that.
Definitely.
I will also say, like, it's so clear to me now, I'll be saying one thing, and the way somebody responds, they're like, I'm like, that's not what I was saying at all. Like,
Yeah.
You did not hear one damn thing I said.
There's a lot of misinterpretation at the moment. There's a lot of people. I've said it in a lot of times. There's a lot of people that are, I don't say looking for a fight, but they're already on guard. They're on guard. They're in a different positions, which means they don't read texts properly, or they don't hear words properly, or they interpret it in the wrong way. And I think it's a big problem. I think it all comes back to this resilience thing. It comes back to this. Everyone's looking to be offended, and I think there's we need to toughen ourselves up as a population. But I suppose we're the last of that generation where, again, we can see it. Hopefully, it doesn't last long. Hopefully, it's a contagion. But we'll talk about that in the follow-up, most certainly.
Yeah,
because I've got two young kids. They're about to potentially go through that, and I want them to have a bit more resilience than the current crop. That's for sure.
Oh my gosh, I know.
Amazing.
So good.
Buddy,
I look forward to our next conversation.